All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we take a look at great theories of everything and try to shed light how to use them efficiently, whatever. And today is our 541st video that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. And Mr. Larson is one of the few scientists to propose a universe composed of not matter, not energy, not force, but motion. And for Larson, motion was the relationship between space and time. And motion was all-encompassing, meaning that it, all of our scientific quantities, such as matter and energy and force and pressure and electric charge, they're all forms of motion. And they all can be expressed in fractions, with space or time as the numerator and time or space as the denominator. Larson proposed his two fundamental postulates in 1959, and from there wrote, from there he derived a theoretical universe about how the universe would look if his postulates were correct. Then he wrote a lot of books kind of comparing his theoretical universe with the measured empirical universe of modern science. And he's got books on physics and chemistry and astrophysics and atomic physics. And he also has a book on metaphysics, which has sections on philosophy and religion, psychology. We're looking at one of his two books on economics. This book is called The Road to Permanent Prosperity. And this is a work of his on macroeconomics. We are in the middle of chapter 9 that is called the markets. And Larson approaches economics in a little bit different way. He dispenses with all of the sociological BS that he complains about in economics, how people are going into it with an ideological approach, and right and wrong, and their own personal political preferences. And he says that economics is a science. You have to understand the science of economics, and you have to comply with the science of economics first, and then you can deal with the ideological stuff later. And that he boils economics down to the first principles: work or starve, and the two reciprocal aspects, which are production and consumption. He takes a long look at the Robinson Crusoe situation, a person on a deserted island, their economic equation, and then begins to add in more complexity with barter, and then money, and then eventually employees, and up into what he calls the fourth stage modern economic system. And then he comes up with some by using this scientific approach, he's able to arrive at equations and principles that he believes are scientifically exact, and many of them fly in the face of normal economic wisdom, so-called. Okay, we are going to wrap up this chapter here in just a couple minutes, and then we'll be starting a new chapter, chapter 10, on the markets. So we just have a couple pages here on the last chapter to wrap up first. And I might add a few words and then start the next chapter. Where there is no emotional factor involved, the present-day economist is able to get a clear picture of the payment situation. And he is able to recognize that piecework rates for labor are payments for services rendered, and that they differ from daily or monthly rates only in the basis of calculation. No one even so much as suggests that the difference between the piecework rate and the time rate has any theoretical significance. And no one contests the assertion that any excess of the piece rate above the hourly rate is just as much a payment for labor as the hourly rate itself. When he turns to a consideration of the analogous payments for the services of capital, however, the same economist sees the situation through the haze generated by his sociological prejudices. Since he has a strong emotional antipathy to large profits, he does his best to set up a theoretical classification in which any excess profit above the current interest rate, pure profit as he calls it, becomes some kind of an unjustified charge against the economy rather than a legitimate payment for services performed. Quote, the economic system in its most perfect condition should operate without profit, says Schumpeter. Quote, profit is a symbol of imperfection. The statement refers, of course, to the economist's pure profit. And what Schumpeter is saying is, in effect, that the optimum conditions, there can be, under the optimum conditions, there can be no reward for assuming the risks involved in operating a business enterprise. But the very essence of the prevailing economic system, the factor that is mainly responsible for its unparalleled record of achievement, is that it rewards the efficient and penalizes the inefficient. Inequality of earnings is not a symbol of imperfection. It provides the incentive that assures productive efficiency. The whole concept of pure profit should be dropped from economics. In application to genuine economic issues, it leads to nothing but such unrealistic conclusions as one of Schumpeter's just cited. The only real purpose that it serves is to create an opening for the introduction of sociological viewpoints into economic reasoning. It is recognized by many of the economic theorists that the unrealistic theories of profits which the profession has developed are not satisfactory, even though they continue to cling to them. Fraser tells us that the theory of profit is, by common consent, the most recalcitrant element in the whole structure of value and distribution analysis. His use of the word recalcitrant in this connection is highly significant. Of course, he really means that the established facts are recalcitrant, that they stubbornly refuse to fit the theory. A continuing conflict of this kind exists wherever theory constructors try to force the facts to conform with some preconceived ideas of their own, and the recalcitrance of the economist's theory of profits is simply a result of their insistence in having a theory which portrays profits in an unfavorable light. This antagonism is not based on economic grounds, it is sociological. And as Lloyd Reynolds comments, the form in which the attack on profits often takes, quote, arouses a suspicion that the critic has not thought through his position. Okay, that is the end of chapter 9 on the markets. And and we're about to start Chapter 10, Price Levels. The subdivision of physical science known as mechanics is customarily separated into two parts. First, the student of the subject is introduced to statics, which is devoted primarily to the effects of the application of forces to bodies at rest. Then he goes on to dynamics, in which he studies the effects of forces on bodies in motion. In general, he finds that the conclusions drawn from the static principles are not applicable to the dynamic situation. A static balance, for example, does not necessarily indicate a dynamic balance. In order to arrive at the right answers with respect to the dynamic system, he must study it as a system in motion, not as a system at rest. And he must apply dynamic principles rather than the static principles. An important point that is emphasized by the scientific analysis of the factual aspects of economic life, whose results are reported in this volume, is that the modern economic system is a dynamic mechanism, a continuous flow process, while the analytical methods that have usually been applied to the study of economic problems have treated each individual item on a static basis without adequate consideration of the relation of this item to the flow pattern of the system as a whole. The application of supply and demand theory to a determination of the general price level, for example, is a case of applying static methods to a dynamic problem. As previously mentioned, it gives completely erroneous answers to some of the most significant questions that arise in connection with the price situation. A distinction between static and dynamic processes is frequently made in economic literature, but this is something of a different nature. In the economist's terminology, the expression dynamic is employed with reference to conditions in which the controlling elements of the static process are variable. As explained by Simon Kuznets, quote, static economics deals with relations and processes on the assumption of uniformity and persistence of either the absolute or the relative economic quantities involved. In contrast, dynamic economics deals with relations and processes on the assumption of change in either the absolute or the relative economic quantities. End quote. Another author puts the case in this way, quote, dynamics now denotes analysis that takes explicit account of temporal leads and lags in economic relationships, as against statics, in which all variables refer to the same point in time. End quote. In this present study, it has become apparent that fourth stage economic activity is characteristically a thing in motion. Some of its elements are not directly affected by time, but on the whole, fourth stage economic life is a continuous flow, a ceaseless progression down the corridors of time, not a stationary entity that can be analyzed on a static basis, irrespective of whether or not the analysis is modified to allow for leads and lags. Most of the basic components of modern economic activity that are customarily visualized and treated independently of time are in reality dynamic entities that can be properly understood and appreciated only if they are studied as moving, working parts of an operating mechanism. In this work, the motion, the continuous flow, is recognized as the essence of present-day economic life, and the term dynamics is used in the sense in which it is defined in the physics textbooks. Quote, dynamics is the study of motion in terms of the forces that produce it. To the economist who believes that he is already using dynamic methods, and to many laymen who are not familiar with mechanics, the distinction that has been drawn between the economist's concept of dynamic processes and the scientific sense in which the term is employed in this present work may not seem very significant. However, the inadequacy of the economist's dynamics has been stressed by many observers, even within the economic profession itself. Frank H. Knight, for instance, pointed out years ago that, quote, what the economic profession, calls dynamics should be called evolutionary or historical economics, end quote. He emphasized the need for a real dynamics. The crying need of economic theory, he insisted, is for a study of the laws of motion, the kinetics of economic changes. The difference between the two concepts, the economist's dynamics and the scientist's dynamics, can be illustrated by consideration of the forces acting on and in a pipeline filled with water. If the line is closed at both ends and left undisturbed, we have a static situation, one in which the various forces acting upon the water and upon the pipe are in constant magnitude and can be identified and measured independently of time effects. Then, if we connect one end of the pipeline to a reservoir in which the water level varies from time to time, we have the equivalent of the economist's dynamic situation. At any specific moment of time, the pipeline and its contents are subject to the same kind of forces and stresses as in the constant static situation. And while a few minor and incidental phenomena, shock waves, for instance, may be introduced, the only major difference is that the physical magnitudes involved are altered whenever the fluctuations in the reservoir change the pressure head acting on the pipeline. If we now open the other end of the pipeline and allow the water to flow through the pipe, the result is something of a totally different nature. The phenomena that are now of greatest concern to us are such items as pressure gradients, rates of flow, friction factors, etc., which were totally absent from the static picture. Here is a true dynamic situation, one that is not in any sense a static situation modified by the introduction of variable magnitudes and by corrections for leads and lags, but a totally different set of phenomena. Our analysis indicates that modern economic life is analogous to this latter situation, and the primary concern of this work is with what Knight called the laws of motion, or the kinetics of the economy. The foregoing reference to a continuous flow in the streams of the economic system does not by any means imply a steady flow. On the contrary, most of our attention will necessarily have to be devoted to the variations in the rates of flow, since it is these variations that introduce problems into economic life. But it is important to realize that the phenomena with which we will be dealing are actually fluctuations and irregularities in a continuous flow process, not independent entities that we can examine and manipulate in isolation. In this present chapter, we will apply this dynamic concept to the nature of the economic mechanism, to the determination of price levels and some related economic quantities. It is evident to begin with that man's economic endowment, his potential labor, and his leisure come to him as a continuous flow, not as an aggregate or as a series of aggregates. The arrival of today presents each individual with the potential of a day's work, which he may put into the economic system in exchange for the benefits that may be derived from such labor. But if he does not choose or is not allowed to convert this potential labor into actual labor today, he cannot do so tomorrow. Unless today's potential is realized today, it is gone forever. Similarly, The benefits of economic activity must come to him essentially in a continuous stream. So far as the basic needs of life are concerned, there is little more leeway than in the utilization of labor. Food must be supplied continuously, otherwise the individual ceases to exist. Clothing and shelter must likewise be available every day if they are to serve their purpose. There is no value in having warm and comfortable facilities available tomorrow if we freeze to death today. After the necessities are provided for, it is, in theory, possible to take delivery of the additional goods in larger aggregates rather than as a continuous day-to-day flow. But in actual practice, a certain standard of living is established by each individual or family, and this standard of living takes the place of the bare necessities as the level beyond which diversion of some of the flow of goods from immediate use becomes possible. Since there is strong pressure for the standard of living to approximate income, within the range of income of most persons, only a small percentage of the population is able to get very far away from the immediate use of all income, even in the wealthiest countries. Thus, the consumption of goods is essentially the same kind of a continuous process as that which provides the potential supply of labor for the production of those goods. As brought out in Chapter 9, the evolution of the economic organization has taken place in the direction of accommodating the mechanism to this need for a continuous output of goods, and the modern four-stage economy is definitely a continuous flow process, a true dynamic operation. The basic elements of the process, as shown on the economic flow chart, which should be at least in your thumbnail, are the stream of goods flowing from production to consumption, and the auxiliary stream of purchasing power flowing in a closed circuit. Goods and purchasing power are both conserved, as is money, although the ratio of money to purchasing power may vary. We are therefore able to treat both streams by the same specific and precise techniques that are applied to the flow of physical substances in scientific and engineering practice. Availability of these accurate methods of procedure is particularly helpful when we undertake to analyze price relations. The present-day theoretical approach to price problems is almost entirely from the direction of supply and demand. But to anyone accustomed to dealing with quantities that stay put, demand is a highly unsatisfactory subject for analysis. The fact that it is not conserved makes accurate results impossible. Furthermore, the real demand, the quantity of goods that consumers are able to buy at a given price, cannot be increased in any other way than by increasing production. The measures that are taken to stimulate demand are thus nothing more than devices to produce inflation of the price level. They will be examined in more detail later. Purchasing power is usually treated rather cavalierly in modern economic analysis. When it is introduced at all, it is regarded merely as an antecedent of demand, and the analysis proceeds on the basis of the latter. But it is evident from the points brought out in the discussion in the preceding chapters and from an examination of the economic flow chart that the flow of purchasing power is not only a vital element in the modern four-stage economic organization, but is also susceptible to accurate analysis because it is conserved. As noted earlier, the conservation laws, which tell us that certain quantities pass through the various processes to which they are subjected without change in magnitude, regardless of how much they may change in form, are some of the most useful tools for analyzing complex phenomena that the scientist has in his repertory. The law of conservation of energy, for instance, asserts that the energy leaving a process is exactly equal to that which enters, plus or minus the energy released from storage or stored during the process. By means of this law, we can follow energy from one process to another, balancing our figures as we go and viewing the accuracy of our calculations at every step. If we find a discrepancy, as we occasionally do, we do not waste time devising some ingenious theory as to why this process differs from all others. We start looking for our mistake, and we always find that there was such a mistake. Purchasing power is an economic factor which, as indicated by Principle 1, has a similar persistence. Hence, we may extend the analogy and set forth a corollary to Principle 1, which will serve the same purposes as the law of conservation of energy. Since the circulating purchasing power is conserved, the flow through successive points along the stream cannot vary except in the way that the flow of energy can vary. That is, to the extent that reservoir transactions take place along the route. Therefore, we have Principle 6. The circulating purchasing power arriving at any point in the stream is equal to that leaving the last previous processing point, plus or minus net reservoir transactions. This principle is valid in terms of real purchasing power as well as in terms of money purchasing power, but storage of real purchasing power can take place only by storage of goods, and consumer storage of goods takes place only to a very limited extent. The average price in the goods market, by definition, is the quotient of the money purchasing power actually used in the market, the active purchasing power, we may call it, divided by the quantity of goods actually sold. This, the market equation, is a direct mathematical relation that holds good under any and all circumstances, with no ifs, ands, buts to qualify it. By Principle 6, the stream of money purchasing power reaching the goods market is the stream that was created by production, with only such modifications as may have been caused by diversions from the stream to fill money reservoirs, or by withdrawals from those reservoirs to swell the stream. Thus, the active purchasing power is equal to production in terms of its money value, plus net consumer money reservoir transactions. In the discussion of reservoir transactions, we will treat a withdrawal from the stream or an input into a reservoir in the algebraic manner as a negative addition to the stream, avoiding the use of the expression plus or minus. The quantity of goods actually marketed is equal to production plus withdrawals from the goods reservoirs. Substituting the foregoing expressions into the market equation that was formulated above, we find that the average goods market price, or the price level, is equal to production in terms of its money value, plus net consumer money reservoir transactions divided by production in terms of volume, plus net goods reservoir transactions. In accordance with the definitions previously stated, the word production is used in the general sense as the creation of utilities and includes the activities involved in the distribution of goods and the rendering of services as well as the production of physical goods. The average price is the average number of units of money per unit of goods volume, regardless of the system of units that is used, and it covers all goods and services marketed without distinction between capital goods and consumer goods. As should be clear from the context, however, it does not include the items that are handled in the production market, labor, and the services of capital supplied to producers. It should also be noted that all of the foregoing discussion of the flow of goods and money refers to the total flow. The extent to which individual products and producers participate in this total is subject to some further influences. Let us now examine some of the consequences of the relation expressed by the market equation. It can be seen that if there were no reservoirs, either of goods or of money, no change in the general price level could originate in the goods market. On first consideration, this observation may not appear to have any significance in application to real life, since there are reservoirs, both of goods and of money, and they play such an important part in modern economic life that their elimination is practically inconceivable. But even though we cannot eliminate the money reservoirs, it is definitely possible, and indeed relatively simple, to eliminate their effects, so far as the price level is concerned, by introducing oppositely directed reservoir transactions of just the right magnitude to counterbalance the net excess of input into or output from the uncontrolled reservoirs. Thus, at this very early stage of our inquiry, we have already identified the means whereby the fluctuations in the general price level that originate at the market end of the economic mechanism can be eliminated. Various practical methods of accomplishing this result with a minimum of interference with normal economic relationships will be examined later. And I guess that is where we're going to stop for today, for this chapter on the markets. We will take over tomorrow and move along with this chapter. I guess what I would just like to say is that, this is consistent with Larson's approach, the universe of motion. And this is an economic system of motion, a dynamic economic system, where we're focused on rates. We're focusing on flow rates and friction and other things that are related to motion as opposed to statics. And that's Larson's wheelhouse right there. So we'll see where he goes from here. Thanks for tuning in today.